Welcome to So Basically,
a podcast about queer stories,
our bond through sisterhood,
and our blunt, semi-filtered thoughts because we need to keep our jobs.
I am Cabrona Logic.
I am the Black Maria Show.
So basically, let's get into it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the So Basically podcast with your host, moi, at the Black Maria Show, and my lovely co-host,
Cabrona Logic here.
Okay, so today's episode is going to be so good, so good. Much. It's going to be an earful of just knowledge, information. Our guests we have, it's going to be really awesome too. So it's just going to be a good time, you know. But of course, before we get into the whole shebang, the whole spiel, we definitely have to do our check-in.
Yeah.
So what do you want to do about our check-in today?
Let's check in. Actually, for our check-in, I wanted to talk about some of the comments we got on our latest episode, which hopefully by now you all had a chance to check it out and listen to it. We released an episode called "Oh Yeah, Listen to Nori," and we talked about a lot of things, but mainly talked about like the word Latinx, the controversies around it, our thoughts about it. Some like definitions, but we also talked about Latinidad and just a bunch of stuff. So you run our Twitter, right?
Yes.
And I get the like YouTube notifications, but we had a couple comments and we wanted to like talk about them and talk through them, and hopefully the folks that commented will listen again and kind of hear our thoughts. So I'll start with the YouTube comment that I shared with you.
Yeah, they're kind of still roughly the same, which is very interesting.
Similar.
Yeah.
Maybe we should read both of them, and let's read both of them then, because I think you're correct. They're very, they're a little bit. There's a little bit of a common thread in the thoughts that were shared. So I won't read the username. We'll keep that private. But in our YouTube, we got a comment. Somebody who shared their thoughts with us. They said that they didn't like the word Latinx because it was a modern term. And they also believed that the term should not refer to someone's gender identity. And then they gave us their preferences, which is Hispanic or Latin. So what I found interesting about the comment was that it obviously appears to be like it's somebody that just has a different opinion. Because we talked about, right, or at least like I tried to present some arguments, particularly to the points that were in this comment. So I'm not gonna like have the conversation all over again. I think that the modernizing of language argument is an interesting one, because I think we all know that like language has like continues to evolve. So I don't think either of us are against the evolution of language, particularly when it's towards inclusivity. So if that's a new perspective to our commenter, that's why we do support a language continuously evolving and modernizing itself, because we want it to do so when it is towards being more inclusive.
Right. Which it sounds like they kind of want to be with the comment. It's like maybe don't want it to necessarily pertain to someone's gender or how their the identity is, but it's like that's the point of Latinx being such a new term, not only trying to tie it back to indigenous roots, but also to be more inclusive, that when you do have a conversation with a person that may be of that group, then it's like you don't specify any specificities about them besides particularly their like race and nationality.
Yeah. Well, what it says to me, and again, I don't know this person, but what it says to me is that it sounds like to me like maybe this person hasn't adopted like an intersectional perspective on the topic, because to say that a term shouldn't refer to someone's gender identity is, again, it's sort of like intentional or not, right? Not wanting to acknowledge that there is a connection between nationality and gender identity, right? And so intersectionality is good, and we need it. It's good, meaning it's a good lens, right? So that would be sort of like, I guess, my encouragement to this listener of like, see if you've considered adopting an intersectional perspective, and if your opinion changes. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. It may not align, but we appreciate you listening, and we appreciate your comments.
Definitely. I think that was like one of our first
I know we've never
first YouTube comments. So I'm excited that we are even getting the interaction. So that's always good too. So
that's why I'm grateful. Our beliefs can still like misalign, and you could like still listen. So
So kudos to them for still listening in. And then a comment we got on our Twitter was the commenter stated, I like Latin or Chicano. People's racial identity shouldn't be defined by their gender identity. But also the next comment they left under that was, I would also like to say, while correcting myself, these are two words of the diaspora and not a race. So once again, just to reiterate,
I was like,
so like we mentioned, the comments are kind of the same, and they're actually from two different people, just from two different areas of the world. I know this one for certain is out of this country. So it's just a reminder that there is an intersectionality, and with certain terms like Latinx, it's more to have inclusivity, in that arena, in that conversation. But anything else you want to add to that?
I think it reminded me of a comment that I did make in the episode last week, which was, again, to folks who are resistant of Latinx, to understand that if you typically would identify as Latino or Latina, speaking to potentially like a cisgender identity, no one is telling you that you're no longer Latino or Latina if you're referred to Latinx. Like nobody's telling you, first of all, nobody's telling you that you're no longer a cisgender man or a cisgender woman, and nobody is telling you that you're no longer of Latinx roots, right? Nobody's telling you that. Right? The term is really just meant to be inclusive to those who aren't you, right? To those who aren't cisgender men or women, and who are also of Latinx roots and backgrounds. So I did appreciate that the commenter like corrected themselves, because that was my first thought. I was like, but we even danced about it. Latinx is not a race. Latinx is not a race. Like we. So I appreciated that again, that they engaged enough to come back and be like, actually. So yeah, we appreciate all the perspectives. We could only hope to again reiterate ours, and what I said about the first comment still stands. Just because maybe our beliefs misalign does not mean that you can't continue to listen. And it also does not mean that
I just keep thinking like
that I won't be firm in what I believed in,
I just always keep thinking that I think when it comes to like the whole conversation, with the conjugation in different languages and trying to associate with different potential genders, it's that we constantly leave out the room in the conversation when there's somebody, what if I identify as male or female, or man or woman, and I refer to myself as they, or I'm just a human being, but I still want to connect with my roots. I still want I have a certain, identity I would like people to know me as, and I still want to connect that to my cultural roots or my nationality. Why can't there be a word that has that represents all that in one, or just me in general?
And because we also talk about these communities, right? And it actually, this actually interestingly connects to our guest for today and the topic we're going to talk about. But like, it means something, and there is a connection. We talk about these communities, right? Communities are talked about in politics and education and all these other settings. And again, the call is to help you, not to help you. The call is to understand that there are individuals who do not identify within the binary, and that those individuals are included in dialogue when we use or we decide that the word Latino is inclusive, knowing that when that language is taught, it's gendered. So that's really just what it is. It's you don't have to say you're Latinx, but if you're talking about the community, because we know we talk about the community in different settings, Latinx is the most inclusive word that I use and that I like to use. And I also, in spirit of correcting ourselves, I would like to correct myself, because when I talked about defining Latina, I still feel like I read it somewhere, but I was not able to locate it. So in the definitions that were posted on our page, it did confirm, unfortunately, what I had shared about Latina being an attempt at getting people to just buy in into another gender inclusive word that's not Latinx because of all the backlash that Latinx has. And also to remind folks that the controversy around the pronunciation of the language is about pronouncing the word in Spanish. So it's obviously not necessarily an issue with pronouncing the word in English, but it's about pronouncing it in Spanish that kind of has this controversy. So yeah, great little recap thoughts. Great little reflections from our last episode.
Right. And now it's time to get into, our conversation with our guests that we have today. Yes. And also, of course, with anyone that we have on our show, especially as a guest, we want to go ahead and give, a little snippet, a little bio about them. So you have an idea of the voice you'll be hearing, coming on into our show. So our amazing guest for today is Duke Cooney. Now, Duke is a candidate for Sacramento County Supervisor, District 2 in particular. Duke has lived in Sacramento for the past 10 years, where he began his career in public service. His early legislative roles with the California Assembly and the Senate allowed him to influence solutions for issues ranging from disability rights to prison reforming, including fair wages for inmate firefighters and other prison workers. And one hashtag that I have said, I've come to pick for Duke, because Duke is literally continuously working, is hashtag Duke stays working. Yes. And I just, once y'all hear,
you're gonna hear all about it.
You're gonna hear all about it, because this human, this man, this young person is out here in the community doing work, not only speaking it, but putting in the time, putting the effort, putting the pen work to make things happen in the community. So yes, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, we're excited to highlight a fellow Hornet, alumni of Sacramento State University. And like you just said, another young person that wants to change the world. We all want to do that. And what I really appreciate is that after this interview with him, I feel like I actually know how to.
Right. Like I have some ideas for myself, and I'm going to look into them.
Yeah. So we hope that y'all enjoyed this interview. We had a great time recording it. We almost said bye 3 times, and then we'll go back to talking. And
legitimately invested.
And we talked after we stopped recording. So yeah, and please enjoy the interview, enjoy the conversation, and we'll see you back for our little outro after the interview's done.
Hello, Duke. We are so excited to have you with us today. This is our first official, serious interview. And we're so happy that you're our first, guest to do this with. So we are amped. As you can see, we're super peppy. Well, listeners can't see that, but
we dressed up today.
Dressed up today. Hope you can hear it on our voices. We're super excited. But for our listeners, if you don't mind, to go ahead and give them a little intro about you, so this they know who is the voice that is on our, show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. Happy to be the first serious interview, although I'm sure you've had many before. My name is Duke Cooney. I live here in South Sacramento, and I'm running for county supervisor. I am the youngest in the election right now, the only person of color, and I would be the first member of the LGBT community to be on the board of supervisors.
Yes.
Okay,
that's what we're here for.
Snaps.
Just a little bit.
Awesome.
So you already said a lot, so we're already excited. We're going to get into it. So of course, we want to really know how this even began, your origin and getting into politics, especially on a local level. So how did your career in public service begin?
Yeah, so I went to Sacramento State University. Stingers up. And so in college, I studied political science. I got really further into government, learning about the structures and the systems. And Sac State actually has a really great program called the Sac Semester Program. And essentially, they connect you with an internship at the California State Legislature. So I did that program, ended up interning for an amazing assembly member who represents a portion of Southern California. But that was my awakening. I was like in this environment with all of these people with their amazing suits and their fancy dresses, and they're creating policy. They're taking all of these social issues and problems that we all talk about, and they're putting it on paper and saying, you know, this is the solution. And it goes through a process where you have stakeholders engaged, and I'm like, well, you know, that's supposed to help our community. And if you just change these couple words, it'll do better for us. You know, this is more of what we want. So it was interesting to kind of see that whole stakeholder process and how people weigh in, to budget type issues, to changing social equity type issues. And that just blew my mind. I loved it. They ended up hiring me on. So I worked for the rest of that session. And a year later, I found my way back to the legislature, and I was working in the Senate this time. And I got to work on public safety issues. I got to be a part of a different, just a different world. And it was great being able to weigh in and learn and figure out how best I can make a difference, because there's so much need for young people, for people of color, particularly in the LGBT community, to be in those environments. You know, in both offices I was in, there was over 10 staffers in the first office and maybe 6 or 7 in the second, but I was the only member of the LGBTQ community. And we would still be sponsoring legislation that had to do with our community, but it almost felt wrong because they were legislating for people that weren't in the room.
Right.
And that really like just stoked a fire in me that said, you know, there needs to be young people in these environments making these decisions, not only being the worker bees, making it come to fruition, but also the decision makers.
Yeah, because it's always scary to kind of think that there's still these group of people on every level, whether it's on a national or on a local level as well, too. Like you have this group of people trying to make changes in our community, but it's also speaking for people that aren't in that room to really know what the needs are. What does that community need? What do they actually want? What is it change they want to see for the future?
Yeah.
You know, so definitely so.
And I also think it's interesting how we get to see the very like far extreme sides of like the consequences of that, right, of not having those voices in the room. But it almost feels like, because it's so extreme, it feels so unattainable, right? It's like you think about like the legislations that are coming out of Texas, and of course you could be up in arms about it, but then like it feels so, it's so extreme, right, of how much control there is, that it's like, well, like how long will it take for that room to change? But hearing what you said just triggered so many things in my brain, because like it's so true, right? Like a lot of us who love to talk about like social issues love to talk about social issues, and then you're like, wait, so what's next, right? Like where does change like take place? And I feel like you're sharing and you're telling us and showing us, right, where that happens.
And I think that is really what empowered me to run for office, because I not only have these conversations day after day with all my friends and colleagues, like, do you see what they're doing? What's going on over here? But I understand the process, so I know how to take it a step further, to go from a conversation and say, you know, actually, I have this set of amendments I'd like to propose for that bill, because this is what community needs. This is what we're asking for. So because I can speak that language, I just felt like I had to do something more than just complain. And I decided to run for office. I opened my campaign committee and started, you know, going door to door for the most part and just breaking through. It's tough as a young person, as a person of color, to just get past that implicit bias folks have. You know, they want to see someone in their, you know, 40s and 50s. They want to see someone who's, you know, non-global majority. I'll just say that.
Right.
And
I like how you worded that. First of all, I'm writing that down. Non-global majority. Noted. Love that.
So when they see that, or when they don't see those markers of the traditional politician, it almost takes them back. And it really has been my job to really demystify, you know, let's talk about homelessness. I know I don't look like, you know, the traditional person who would be leading those conversations, but I understand the policy behind it. I understand what you're doing. I understand budget allocations and how this process moves from just an idea to a solution. And I know how to weigh in from the community perspective. So I ended up switching from the California Senate, and I do statewide environmental policy work.
Okay.
I do, yeah. So focus on climate change, getting funds out there to different groups who are doing the good work when it comes to prepping for fire season, getting our communities ready, creating cooling centers. There is a whole lot of money coming up for parks and for different urban greenery. And all of that is something that I've been working on for the past 2 years with my firm. We've been working and hustling to get those funds out so that we have environmental funding. You know, it's a talking point for a lot of people. But for us who actually live in these communities where there's poor air quality, where there's no parks, where there's no tree canopy, you know, that's everyday life. We need that stuff. So it was great to have the ability to actually have my hand in those pots. And now in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see that money start to trickle in and hopefully see some things change. You know, for me, politics is really what you see. For a lot of folks, especially towards like the Stockton Boulevard, the Franklin Boulevard, if you know where that area is in South Sac, you know, you step outside and there are very few trees. There are lots of trucks, there are lots of cars, there are lots of liquor stores and empty lots, but you're not going to see healthy food options. You're not going to see a nice park to have your birthday party or take your kids for an hour or two. You just don't have that. And when that happens, you really get disenfranchised. You know, what difference does it make if I vote? Because my neighborhood keeps looking the same year after year. What difference is it if I call my representative and say, hey, I'd like XYZ in my neighborhood? Because it doesn't happen. The system is not set up to really cater to community. It's a very top-down approach. So, you know, it's amazing that I was able to work on, you know, that environmental funding for all the different projects that are coming up, particularly in Sacramento. But now I'm thinking, well, now it's up to the county and the city to apply for those funds and make sure that they get to the community. And I want to be part of that process. I want to make sure that those dollars end up where they're needed most.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's too, just that it's really, I just wasn't mind to see the difference in just the areas of Sacramento as well too, because you talk about an area like South Sac, where you don't have, you know, just like you mentioned, it's more liquor stores, more type of food deserts. There's no parks as many as you expect to see, and then you go to areas like Rancho Cordova where there's more greenery, there's more parks availability, there's, you know, there's just more greenery seen around the area, and it's a big difference. So it'd be great to see Southside get to even just somewhat at that same level, so you don't even have to go out of your city to get that. So it'd be great to see.
And you know, I bought my first home 2 years ago, and it's been interesting. So I for the longest time I've lived around Sac State since I've gone to school there, and now I go to McGeorge School of Law, which isn't too far away. It's in the Oak Park area. But buying my house, I've really become invested in the South Sac community. But it's also troubling. Like you mentioned, I live in Cabrillo Park, which is this little box area here. And to my left, Alyssa's left, I have the pocket area. And similar to Rancho Cordova, you see amazing urban greenery, just the most immaculate forest areas, the most immaculate parks. It is fantastic. But you go down Florin Road, just 5 minutes, and everything changes. It's almost like a different world. But how did a place not even 2 miles away have all of this investment and beauty and just care, but just travel 5 minutes down the road, and it's almost like a third world country at some parts? And it's, for me, it's glaring. What are you doing? What's going on, city and county of Sacramento? Because this didn't take one generation. This is multiple generations compounded and compounded of just not caring. You know, and it's really our job to say, you know what, maybe we weren't alive when this was set into motion, but now it's our job to start taking the steps to unpack and make things a little bit better for folks.
I think what you just said makes me think of like how important it is, because I think the unfortunate piece about the way that communities like South Sacramento, and like particularly the ones that you were describing, I think what's unfortunate is that there's almost now this like kind of pressure on the community itself of like, this, like, y'all let this happen. And it's unfortunate because there are so many beautiful, rich parts about South Sacramento. Like I'm from Mexico City, my family's from Mexico City, and it's really hard to actually find cultural like symbols and like references like in the United States, because a lot of you know, folks are from everywhere. And so to find like city, like Mexico City, like food and music, it's so hard to find, but I find it in South Sacramento and it feels so close to home. But and at that time, right, as a college student in Sacramento, I'm like, I love South Sac. That's where I feel, it feels familiar, and not realizing, well, it feels familiar because they are mimicking, right, like the low income communities where you come from, like where you came from. That's why it feels familiar, because it literally looks like, right, like the low income backgrounds that all of us come from. So that's why it feels so familiar. And it's almost like, well, how do we, or like we should honor the rich culture and the people that are in those areas by making those legislative changes, because like you said, somebody, right, years of decision making took place for that to be like the area where that ended up looking like. So
it's so true. You're right. There's over 10 languages spoken in South Sacramento alone. It's a melting pot. It's one of the most diverse districts and areas here in South Sacramento. But to your point, we haven't had a representation that reflects that diversity. And when you don't have people who grew up either similar to those communities or in those communities, you don't know what it's like.
Right.
You don't know what it feels like to grow up in poverty, what that stress, what that pressure looks like, what it feels like to see your parents struggle, your grandparents struggle. I think that changes the way you approach issues. It's not just, a talking point or, something on the agenda. No, that's for people like me. This program will help people that look like me, that grew up like me. And you really need representation that understands the way that feels, because that's literally how you change policy. You make it personal. And until it's personal, you won't make it a priority to make it easier for these folks in South Sacramento. You won't do it.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. I feel like we could go on this first question forever, but let's transition, because you did touch on this a little bit, talking about like your early career really being born out of, right, like not seeing folks like you in the rooms and in the spaces, and knowing that the work is for people like you, or for people that you know, or communities that you're a part of. One of the common threads that has come up for us in this podcast that I know I didn't expect, I don't know if Maria, if you did, but when we started bringing, our friends, young professionals, all of us kind of starting in our different fields, every time we had somebody on, common threads came up for all of us about our identities, whether it was racial, ethnic identity, queerness, the intersection of all of those, right? Gender, everything. And so many of our guests have shared so many similar things, even though they're all in very different areas and spaces. And so we're curious if you could share with us, like, what has it been like to navigate those spaces as an openly gay candidate, and the intersection of other identities that you hold as well. Like, whether there are some stories that you're comfortable sharing, or just overall a snippet or a summary of like, what has it been like to almost force yourself into those spaces?
And it really has been forcing myself into these spaces. My mom didn't go to college. I had to figure out the FAFSA process myself, applications to get into college and law school and all that. As first generation kids, like that's just what we do. We know the goal, we know where we want to get to, but everything else we have to make it till we, fake it till we make it. And you just have to do it, and you have to do it. So that hustle gets inside of you. And it's challenging at times, being in the legislature. The first office I was in was very welcoming. They just wrapped my arms around me. It was the legislator was Black, and most of the staff were people of color. Majority were women, and it was just such a great environment to learn and grow. So they never made me feel like I was different. But the minute you step outside of that door, there is a little bit of apprehension, and you see it from those who are non-global majority, who are a little bit older, who kind of give you that look. They don't have to say anything, but they just look at you in that way, and you just know what they're saying in their head, which is, who are you? Why do you think you belong in this space? And I just push right past it, because I've really had to rely on my intellect, on what I know, and get used to standing firm in my beliefs. If I'm telling you that this is the policy issue that I think is best, I'm going to let you push back, but I'm also going to reaffirm what I'm telling you. because I may be young, I may be biracial, I may be, half black, half white, but, this 28-year-old person of color knows what he's talking about. I have the education to back it up. I have the policy experience to back up what I'm saying. And what I've learned in the legislature, just being firm in what I know and not letting anyone shake those beliefs, has benefited me so much on the campaign trail, where I'm seeing those folks all the time. Those folks who, even people from my own community. So I'm openly gay. I'm married. I have a wonderful husband and a 2-year-old daughter. But for some LGBT folks, it's not the same experience. They don't understand, oh, you're an LGBT person of color. I know exactly what that is. I'm so happy you're running for office. Sometimes, if they're non-global majority, I'll get pushback. I'll get the head tilts, like, maybe you are in my community, kinda, but, I still have these implicit bias around race or age that make me not want to buy into you just yet. Luckily, I push forward. I've, continued to just reiterate what I want, which is a better Sacramento, and why I want it, because it needs to happen. We need to have younger voices and people of color and from diverse communities. I may not be, Mexican American or Vietnamese American, but I grew up with those communities. I'm originally from Vallejo, which not too long ago was the #1 melting pot in the United States, the most diverse area. And that's what it was like growing up. I had all these influences and cultural communities around me, and I saw into their families and into their values. And that has just pushed me forward. When I have those people who look at me and say, why you? Why do you think you can represent my community, my family? And I'm 100% certain that I can do a great job, because I know what it's like to struggle. And there is a universal experience being in America and being a person of color. Regardless of what your specific ethnicity, what your religion is, there is just a common set of treatment that people of color get. You might not get the full force of it, but you'll get something. So there are those areas where I can relate to folks, and I can bridge some of those gaps. I always talk about LGBT folks as the ultimate unifier, because we're cross-cultural. We live in every religion, in every corner of the world, and we've always existed. At the outlier of society, we're always looking in. We're always almost a part of the society, almost included in the conversation. But still, I want to uplift folks. At times I may not have felt like I was included in some of those communities, but I see the importance, I see the value, I see the beauty of diversity. And I've just been firm in that. It is tricky at times, but usually after I talk with folks a little bit, discuss some of my plans and what could Sacramento look like, folks buy in. Even if at the beginning of the convo, they might have been apprehensive because they've never met a gay person. They've never spoken with a young Black person running for office. So they're apprehensive, but finding those commonalities where we can agree, finding those issues that we all care about. We don't want to see homeless folks. We don't want to explain to our children what that is, why these folks have to be outside. I had to do that with my daughter. I was at Cesar Chavez Park, and I was speaking at an event there, and the event ended and we were walking by, and there was a homeless man sleeping under a tree. And my daughter said, "Papa, he's sleeping." And my whole world flashed before my eyes, because I thought, she's 2 years old. How do I explain this in a way she'll understand? And as a 2-year-old, she doesn't understand why someone has to sleep outside. But Papa, there's houses all over. What's the problem?
Exactly.
and those are the issues that we can connect.
Put kids in the Senate.
Put kids there. It needs to happen. I'd like to see a youth spot on the Board of Supervisors, on the City Council, an actual voting member who can represent that demographic. They have to live in our communities. They have to experience these things. And, why can't they have a voice? And that's one of my frustrations when folks are apprehensive of me because of my age or because of my race. It's, why do I have to buy into a system for my whole life until I'm 50 or 60 before all of a sudden now I can take my right to run for office? Now I can do something.
That's a whole other conversation too, because it's like, why is that the ripened age to finally get into policy change or get into politics? It's like, if I'm ready to go at 25, I see a focus, I have a mission, I want to see change in the community. Why can I go? I'm amped up right now.
Right.
Why are you nervous about me coming into a space where I can actually be in office and, set a change for potentially the next 30 plus years? Instead of it being when I'm 45 and now I'm going to be in there for maybe 10 or, we don't know the span of time we're going to be a part of that at that time. So,
and you may not have that fire at 40.
Right.
We don't know. So let me go now.
Right.
In mind.
Well, and the other part of that is what you brought up, Duke, around like, we know that, well, I studied higher education, and in higher education, we talk about credentialism, right? This idea that like, in order to be able to do a job, you have to have the credentials for it. And higher education being one of those fields that continuously perpetuates that. So it's such an interesting sort of like circular reflection to have at times. But it made me think of what you said, right? Of like, if you didn't have those like identities, the surface identities that they could see, right? The first thing that they would think about would be qualifications and certifications and credentials, all those things, right? You have them. So you come with them and they're like, oh, but wait, there has to be this other reason. And it's so interesting because it reminded me of a post that went viral very early in the pandemic. And it was a Black woman that was talking about how college education and degrees were not worthless until people of color started getting them, right? Like it used to be that you could have a really nice lifestyle and get any job you wanted with a bachelor's degrees. And then all of a sudden, I mean, we know that now, right? You get a bachelor's degree, that's cool. But you really need a master's nowadays, right? And then even then, folks go get a master's degree and they still have imposter syndrome, still have implicit bias, still have systemic racism, still have all these things to face. So it's like, y'all just showing yourselves out because the answer keeps like changing. And, I think about that from what you shared, right? You show up, you have the knowledge, you have the intellect. It's almost like we know this, we have to have it. Like, we have to know what we're talking about. We have to like truly study harder and have more knowledge because that's the first thing folks are going to go for. But then it's funny on the flip side to see how they respond when they can't get you at that. Like when you have the intellect to back it up. I'm curious if you have like meetings where they've been like, gosh, well, now what do I say?
I was actually going to ask you just a quick follow-up one before we go into our next question was, with people that you encountered initially when you first got into your like early public service roles that maybe were a little apprehensive of you or kind of gave you that side-eye look, like, what are you doing here? Do you encounter them now since now you're actually running for a bigger role, a higher title, and actually moving through, a political career?
Yeah, and to your point, the dial keeps changing. I personally don't believe you need policy experience to be a great politician. I would like that whole idea to just go out the window because I know fantastic people, incredible minds with the greatest hearts, the greatest ideas you would ever believe, but they don't work in government. They don't apply for boards and commissions, but that doesn't decrease their value.
Right.
So for me, as someone who has worked in the legislature, who now works on statewide policy that's literally bringing billions of dollars to the environment here in California, I still get with the, well, but what boards and commissions are you on? And I was just in a meeting with an LGBT organization that I'm working with to try and get their endorsement and their support. And I've got that. I got the pushback. Well, what boards and commissions and why haven't you applied? And I reminded them that process is very selective. Your representative has to choose you. If they don't know who I am, if I'm not someone's nephew or brother or son, I'm not going to be on their radar. And I've applied for 2 different commissions, Mental Health Commission, and when I first got to Sacramento, the Youth Commission. Neither one gave me a follow-up. Neither one gave me a call back. But what I am doing is I'm serving on community boards. So I was on the Sacramento Black Leadership Council, which oversaw the development of a new sexual health center here in South Sac. And the focus of that organization is to bring, thank you. It's meant to improve the sexual health and decrease HIV rates of African Americans. That was a specific target of that grant because in South Sac, we have enormously high rates of HIV infection for African Americans. And it's those roles that I sought out and found to be able to influence that process. I also serve on an equity advisory group for a campaign that's trying to create a toolkit and bring together resources for folks and cities and counties across California to transform their first response. So this is looking at 911 models, who calls when you have a domestic violence problem, when you have petty theft, when someone's having behavioral mental health crisis, who do you call? And if we're realizing that maybe law enforcement may not be the best catch-all, then how do we reform that process? And we're creating the toolkit to show folks, this is how you advocate at the city council level. This is how you take steps to make sure that it's included in the budget, to make those systemic changes. And personally, I feel being on that equity advisory group is more meaningful than serving on some city or county commission, because I'm able to make direct changes, direct impacts. The cities we have right now in our coalition are Sacramento, San Diego, and Stockton. So we're working with advocates in all three cities to start the process to get this whole the system changed. And it might look different for Sacramento. San Diego has a co-responder model right now, so police respond with them. For Sacramento, maybe we might decide that, well, the historical narrative is just not great. People are not going to use this service if police are there. So let's change the model. Let's make it all mental health clinicians. But for us, it's just finding the biggest toolkit, the most, the most accurate compilation of data and information, so these counties and cities can be empowered to focus on their own solutions. So it's those events, those opportunities that I talk about. I still have that policy experience that they're looking for, but even that extra nugget of, well, what boards and commissions have you been on? Have you ever served on the city council before? It's like, no, but I have helped make change in my community and communities across California. So I always fire back with that, not necessarily to amp myself up or make me seem like an amazing person, but to show that there are other ways to get involved outside of what this person in front of me may value in a politician. Maybe their idea is just, let me value only people who have these specific credentials.
Yeah.
Oh, I was saying to myself, I'm like, letting our listeners know that Duke is constantly working. Okay. Yes. If one thing that Duke is doing, he's working. Okay. He's working.
Yeah.
I am. I'm on
levels. Okay.
I have 2 jobs. I'm still a night student at McGeorge School of Law. And running a campaign, but I'm making it work.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of us first generation and people of color, you got to make it work, because you got to work twice as hard.
There's no other choice but to.
It is. It's do or die. And it has to be done. I saw no one else rising up and making these changes. I'm literally the only person in all of this whole district that's running against this guy. This person who majority of folks I've talked to aren't necessarily happy with. But they tolerate him for whatever reason, because he's already ingrained in the system, because he has that network that supports him. But it needs to change. And I think it says a lot that a 28-year-old biracial gay man is rising up and saying, look, this can be better. This can be a lot better. And it's just going to take you all looking at me and saying, you're not what I thought a politician would look like, but you should be. There's no reason you aren't, because what you're saying is what I want for my community.
I love that. And also to tie in how you're continuously working, because Duke is working. That should be the hashtag. Duke is working.
Duke is working.
Duke stay working. Okay. So you mentioned about being just, a young adult in the political, in your political career, in this community, doing your work, running for this position. So we did, as we do, we stalk our upcoming guests, but we did notice that
we call it research.
Oh, I apologize, because I probably helped scare research, right? So you have an upcoming panel that you're going to be on, and I think the actual title of it is called Are Millennials and Gen Z Politically Engaged? So we definitely want to know more about that, and go ahead and give a little promo for it, because we want to hear, because hashtag Duke stays working, especially in the community. So definitely talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I believe it's the 19th, which is not this upcoming Tuesday, but next Tuesday. I'll be at Sacramento State University with a panel of local candidates here in Sacramento a couple other youth leaders as well. But essentially, it's a discussion on politics and why millennials are not involved and how we can be. For us, what we value is change in our communities. What we value is seeing politicians do things. Politicians value votes. And when they look at communities, they think, well, is that a voting community? Do I have to cater to what they're asking for? And because our demographic is not by and large politically active, because we're not the biggest block of voters, they don't look to us. If the age range was 18 to 32, and those were 100% all the voters in California, that's the voting bloc, biggest group, what every politician had to vie for, policy would be written in a way that caters to our demographic. We would be seeing a lot more progressive ideas. We'd probably see alcohol available till 4 a.m. like it is in New York. And that's what's important. Obviously not alcohol till 4 a.m.
Yeah.
But
it's a voice.
Yeah, they're only going to empower us to speak on policy and to really be able to weigh in on the way our society is ran if we vote, if we're active, if they look at us and say, wow, if I don't do something for this group of voters, they're not going to vote for me and I'm going to be out of here. And that puts the fire under them to get active, to start making changes, to not just look at that 40 to 75 age range, because we know they return their ballots all the time. The older folks, they do it religiously. So we see a little more conservative legislation because that's the voting bloc they're catering to. So this event is really going to be an opportunity for a lot of us younger candidates, myself. I believe Jimmy Fremgen is going to be there. He's running for Congress. We have Alana Matthews, who's also running for district attorney here in Sacramento County, and a few others. But we're just going to be discussing our campaigns, talk about voter engagement. For me, my biggest thing is making sure that everyone I encounter knows what the Board of Supervisors is, what they do, how they're responsible for a $6.7 billion budget, how they oversee public health, how they oversee welfare services, social services. They can be involved in so many aspects of our day-to-day lives, and no one ever thinks what a supervisor is. Some of these folks have these jobs for decades. And there was a poll in my own district that said less than 10% of people knew who their supervisor is. This guy has had the job for almost 10 years. Ooh. So the fact that so few know who it is, but he keeps getting elected is part of the problem. Folks are seeing that incumbent and just marking yes. And on this panel, we're all new candidates. We're all trying to break through the system, trying to do our best to, one, educate folks on why it's important for us to vote, but also tell them that there's another way. And all it takes is you buying into our dream. All it takes is you voting and making sure your family's engaged, your cousins are engaged. If you have a friend who lives in the area, make sure they know what's going on so that they can be a part of the process. I think if you explain politics in a way that is conversational, is just a conversation between friends, it'll be received. And I think a lot of times there's just this rhetoric and this way of speaking that just goes in one ear and out the other. And they do it purposely. They use big words that no one knows. They probably don't even know. Yeah. They read from talking points that somebody else prepared, and it doesn't resonate with people. So, our goal as candidates is to get a different block of voters to the polls. That's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about challenges we're facing. But I can't impress, enough how important it is for young people to register to vote, to take a peek at least 1 to 2 times before the election. Who's running and why? What's their real background? I see all these boards and commissions and panels and XYZ, but what are they really like? Like, what are their hobbies? What do they do for fun? What's their mom like? How was it growing up? Because those experiences shape the way you approach problems. Anybody can do policy. You both can be elected governor, governor, lieutenant governor, and you would do a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you say so.
You would. You really would. You have these experiences and this mindset that approaches issues, not just as an issue itself, but this is my family who's going to be impacted. This is my community who's going to be impacted. So I need to make sure that all that is in my mind when I'm deciding on policy. And that's what Sacramento County has been lacking. There's sort of been this industrial complex that has taken hold, and the same voters go to the polls, so the same people get elected, and the same people get elected, and they appoint the same people to these boards and commissions, people that look like them, people who are from the same communities they are. You don't see aunts and someone's mom and a grandma on these commissions, you know, average people with minimum wage jobs. You don't see it because they don't know how to apply, and because they're not engaged to be a part of that process. So we'll be talking about all that great stuff on the 19th, as well as throughout our campaigns.
I was going to say, I just thought about it. I didn't even really think about just looking into like more so local government or like citywide involvement until randomly, until I saw Head of State when I was like a kid. If listeners, if you don't know what the movie is, it's a movie about it has Chris Rock and Bernie Mac, and it's basically how like our big government ends up choosing a random local alderman to run for president, just to basically to lose to the already continuously running president at the time. And it's a comedy, it's a really fun thing, and you kind of see how government works a little bit, all, you know, parody, satires, jokes, and things like that. But I really thought about that because, you know, growing up early, you just knew about our presidential election. Like I knew there were politicians, local politicians, things like that. But I'm like, okay, they're just, I don't know, like, what do you do with that? Like, what happens with that? And I think it wasn't really until I moved up to Sacramento for school is when I really started seeing at least people in the community that were running for like local government, local positions that were just around. Like they would be on campus at Sac State, or they would be at some events, you know, just trying to speak and get their point across too. So that's when I really saw, you know, the people that were running actually just in the community, in the city, doing work, like putting their words on paper and actually being involved into the communities they were trying to, you know, help support. So for sure.
And that's such the big part of it. For me, as someone who doesn't have the luxury of already serving on councils and commissions and all this, I really had to be in the community. That's the one thing I can do. I can show up. And I've helped with different cleanups around Sacramento. I've helped with a shoe drive here in Sacramento. Any way that I can be involved and show my face and actively do something. So at the end of this campaign, I can say, wow, win, lose, I just did something fantastic. This community now has a clean place to take their family. You know, for those families that we donated to for the shoe drive, that's an opportunity for them not to have to stress for back to school. And I know as a kid, that's something I struggled with. I didn't always have the newest clothes. And just to see these programs that exist, to get involved with them, to start talking with local advocates and nonprofits who are on the ground doing this great work, where the city, the county, just government in general has not been a presence. You know, the new sexual health center I mentioned, that was funded by a nonprofit, by a grant they applied to. It wasn't a government solution coming in and saying, hey, health disparities are bad for African Americans and other people of color. We need to do something. They didn't do anything. This is the nonprofit stepping up and giving community solutions to folks. And that's what we need. That's what I want to empower on the board. You know, we have amazing groups already doing the good work. We just need to make sure that we empower them and we fund them. Make it impossible for them to get the money. Give it to them. Because they do it. They have those connections. They're in their communities and they can make a difference. They just need someone to really look at them and say, you're the solution.
Right.
Doesn't matter what I write down on paper. It's you.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Duke wants you to vote.
Yes.
Duke wants you to get engaged and to learn and to meet the candidates. I think, you know, I want to give a quick shout out to one of our sorority sisters, Rosa Barrientos, always keeps us on check. Every time there's a new election, she always makes sure, first of all, I know she's organizing in her community, but she always makes sure to circle back with the chapter and put on the group chat all the voting guides that she has access to and all the things. And even, I think I remember one year, maybe like she hadn't sent it yet, and we were like, ma'am, can you help us? Like, where is that tool? And I think those are the things that like we could do. Because that's what I ask myself constantly. I ask myself constantly, like, well, what can I do? And obviously the one obvious answer is you can run for office, right? Like that's one thing. But I almost feel like because there's such a, in our generation, going back to that topic, right, of millennials, I almost feel like maybe Gen Z is almost showing off millennials a little bit more, because I think we just like really just don't trust the system. We
Exactly.
know the system is broken, and we got to learn about that, and we just distrust it so much.
We saw it fall apart.
Yeah, we were like,
many times. We were like,
many.
Yeah, so we were like, I don't know if that's where I'm going to continue to be invested, right? And the unfortunate piece is then we turn around and we do invest in our community, but like you just described, those are not the platforms that are amplified by the government, right? So it tends to stay there unless those connections start happening, right? And like those agencies are working with candidates like yourself who are trying to like kind of keep that chain going. So I feel like those are very tangent, actionable things that can happen, right? Like if you're listening right now and you're like, ooh, okay, what do I do? Like literally start with that, right? Making sure, like you said, that your cousins are voting, that your friends are voting, that maybe you're the person in your friend group that creates the voting guides. Like be the Rosa that you want to see in the world.
That's a hashtag.
But for real though, like every year she comes through with that, and every time she comes through with that, and it's like be that person, right? Like be that person that sends it on your family group chat, like, hey, right? I think that so much during the last couple presidential elections, so many folks around our age had to battle with like voting differently than their parents or than their families. And I feel like that's probably where we could start. We could start trying to change that, unless, right, you're working with Duke and running, which I think, like I said, you could do anything. You could do any of it. You could do all of it. But if it feels too intimidating, right, start by being that person that creates voting guides for your family members, for your cousins, for your friends, right, that learns about, the candidates, and that can try to like even support campaigns. I think that that's something that people could do, right? It's actually our next segue. Like you brought up the good question of like, people don't know what district supervisors are. Tell us about your campaign, the position you're running for, and how can our listeners stay in tune and stay engaged with your journey specifically.
Right,
we want them to support you.
Right. Thank you. I'll just give you a quick overview of California government in general. Sounds a lot, but I'm going to say it fast. Okay. So at the local level, we have the city council, which everyone knows. You look to the city council, they have the biggest job because they're the ones that we see the most. So they have to do crime, they have to do public safety changes, homelessness battling, making sure there's housing opportunity, business opportunities. But one level up is the county board of supervisors. So they represent different areas within a region or a county. And it incorporates multiple cities. So we have a representative from like North Highlands, Del Paso Heights, of course, South Sacramento, and below me, Elk Grove area has their own district as well, and Midtown, downtown as well. But the county has the biggest budget. So they have almost $6.7 billion. That is a lot more than the city council. So they have this power of the purse, as we call it in government, to make these changes. They can choose to fund public health initiatives. Most notably, recently we had a Supervisor Cerna, amazing guy. He pushed forward the Black Child Legacy Campaign, which took a look at childhood infant death rates and figured out that it's the Black children that are dying at these extremely high numbers. And the county was just looking at this report year after year after year, just like, oh, that's a bad thing. And he got on the board and took a look and said, this is really bad. What are we actually doing about this? And that set into motion a very concrete campaign that has led to a reduction in the deaths of Black children through different community solutions, making sure that folks have access to childhood education, knowing how to care for a baby, knowing how to look for those health issues that come up. Me as a young parent, I know that's one of the most stressful things. When do I take them to the doctor? When is a rash more than just a rash? And it's those things that they don't teach you. We don't learn about it in schools. And if you're not actively looking, you won't see it. But it's those types of changes that can happen overnight and impact our lives in a very real way. And the county board, for me, has the most opportunity because they lack the most diversity. And when you have the same type of people in all of those seats, all 5 of them, you don't get a very robust idea of what it's like to live in this community. You have one voice multiplied by 5 in slightly different ways. So they're missing a youth perspective. They're missing someone who has brown, dark brown skin, who is visibly African-American, to be included in those conversations. It's amazing what Supervisor Cerno was able to do for the Black Child Legacy campaign. But I think of, what if we had 3 Black members of the supervisors? They would have done something a whole long time ago.
A long time ago, right?
Because they would have said, those are my kids. That's my family. And that's what you need. Someone who, you can't always just get lucky with a great supervisor who happens to care about these issues. You have to have multiple communities being a part of this governing board. And they get a lot of funding from the state. So at the state level, we have the California Assembly and the California Senate. And then, of course, we have the governor overseeing all of it. And while there is potential to make changes at all these levels, the County Board of Supervisors has the most authority because there's 5 people with equal power overseeing this enormous budget. And there are very few people who can check the supervisors.
Right.
So I would love for people to get involved with the campaign. I know it's weird as young people and folks who haven't gotten politically active to know what it means to donate to a campaign or how impactful that is. Unfortunately, money is the metric. People are going to look at you, no matter what candidate you are. Can you raise the dollars? Because that's what we value. We'll endorse you, but we want to know that you're working, you're able to raise those dollars, you're able to get those endorsements, you're able to talk to people and get in touch with community. And I've been hustling. I've been making sure that it happens, going through the motions and doing what I have to be successful. I want to bring change. I want to really empower my demographic and in my age group, Gen Z, millennials, even Gen X, and let them be a part of the conversation. And of course, I'm on Instagram, Duke for Supervisor. If you ever want to send an email and have a Zoom sit down and talk about something in your neighborhood, Duke Cooney 2022 at gmail.com. Or you can check out our website and sign up for updates there. But from now until June 7th, I'm going to be hustling. I'm going to be working because I know how hard and how important it is to have a younger voice, someone with diverse perspective who knows what it's like to grow up a little bit different and who knows what struggle feels like. If you don't know what it's like to have to stretch $20 a few days, you might approach budgets a little differently.
Right.
Or to see your parents and your grandparents do that or look at you and say, we'll have more food tomorrow. It's a very real experience. And I don't think that enough of our politicians feel that. Or it was, to your point, it was so long ago because now they're in their 60s and 70s. They only know what it's like to be rich. They forgot what it's like to be hungry.
Right.
And as young people, we know what it's like to be hungry at every step of the way. So we want it. And we're going to work for it and bring that fire. And that's exactly what I'm doing for my campaign. So as many people as want to get involved as possible. We're going to be canvass. We're going to have events and rallies and neighborhood cleanups. And it's going to be amazing. And this is going to be a movement. I want to be the first, but I don't want to be the last.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what it has to be. We've had 2 years of social unrest and just dissatisfaction. Our whole generation has seen government not work over and over and over again. And the only way it's going to get better is if we take those seats back and we say, you know what? You had 8 years to do something transformative. You didn't. Now it's our turn.
Yeah. That I feel like that would be get told to anyone in any job. Like if I had my job for 8 years and didn't do anything good with it or new with it, we talked about it. They would bring me in. So you heard it here. Duke is working. He's gonna stay working. He's gonna be working. Please get involved. I know that already I'm ideas, but we're recording, so
right. You can definitely touch bases later on if you have ideas.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, I think, like you said, there's just so many ways to do this work that feels like it's not right. Why? right? I think that's what I'm getting from you, and the reason why I'm like, I don't even live in Sacramento, but I'm like, because you're right? I think constantly, and I was talking to my partner actually about the interview, and I was what I was sharing was that I'm like, the unfortunate piece about the perception of politics, right, is that you feel like you needed to know that this is something you wanted to do at a certain point because of just like the sternness of like politics. I'm not like a hater, but I'm also not her biggest fan. But like you saw what happened to AOC, right? They literally tried to dig and they found this video of her like dancing on a rooftop and try to make it a thing. And I'm like, man, I've done some things like I can't even like I feel like I needed to have known that back then to then not do them, so that when I did it and they looked into me, there was not. But if we look right now, I'm like, I don't know. And I love that you're challenging of that, like, why do you have to have experience? Why do you have to look a certain way? Why do you have to be a certain age? Why can't it look like non-traditional campaigning and politicking? Like, why does that have to be, that hasn't worked, right? So let's do it different. So I think that's the sort of like where the excitement is coming for me, because it's like I finally am seeing somebody that's like, yeah, no, like let's not do it that way. It doesn't have to be. Because I'm like, yeah, nah. It's.
I have a question for you. So you mentioned the date June 7th. Is that the election date for when we actually go in to vote for you, or is that okay? So just say that one more time so we all know. So it's June 7th.
Yeah, June 7th, 2022.
Okay.
And your mail-in ballots will be mailed out a few months before that. But we'll be sending updates if you sign up or if you follow us on social media. We'll make sure that you know when it's going to hit your inbox and what you can look for, because it won't just be my name on the ballot, which obviously is going to be my most important part. Yeah. But I want to make sure you know who the other people running.
Everybody else.
Because it doesn't benefit me at all if you support me this election, but you fall off the grid and you completely stop caring, which is what happens. We elect people so we don't have to worry about that stuff. But the system is not set up in a way that that's going to benefit us. We have to not only give you our vote, but say, look, you talked about X, Y, Z. You told us you would have a solid plan for homelessness, a solid plan to get me into a house because I'm tired of renting. Do it. And I totally welcome accountability. I welcome that challenge for folks to follow up with me and say, look, we got you elected. Now we need to see some things change. And that's how it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. June 7th, 2022. You're going to see us. And we're obviously, like I said before we started recording, we want to support your journey. So I'm sure that we can find ways to share within our pages too as it gets closer. But to our listeners in Sacramento, we know you all. Like, y'all literally are friends, our sisters. I don't live in Sacramento no more, but y'all do. So whenever you see Duke doing something for the community, join in. I know that, we all have a background in Greek life and sorority and fraternity life at Sac State. The community really needs to come together and rally for you and support you. And like you said, follow up and follow through. So
under the hashtag Duke stays working. I just feel like that's really it. I feel like it's warming up, so if you ever,
I'm loving it more and more.
All right. If you ever see Duke out there doing his thing, just snap it and then put the hashtag, because it happened here. It happened here. Yeah. We just want to say we appreciate you so much for taking time to just speak with us, to not only let our listeners know about your journey and process through your public service career, now your political career, but also how you're involved in the community, the policy changes you have that you've already implemented and been a part of, but that you want to change for the future, especially for South Sacramento. And Duke is here to change the game. And once again, hashtag Duke stays working.
Okay. Thank you all so much. It was awesome to meet some other fellow Stingers up, Sac State alums.
Yes, absolutely. We're so I'm like, I feel like I don't know what to think, because I'm thinking so much right now. But we're super grateful that you took the time to do this, to have this conversation with us today, to share more about all the things that not a lot of us take the time to learn, or it doesn't always feel accessible and comprehensible, right, to those of us that don't have the lingo. So I totally appreciate that. I also appreciate and remind folks, right, that like there's a sense of humanity that we forget about, because we do have, and we have for a really long time, seen people that almost don't, that they don't bring that humanity themselves, right, because it doesn't relate to many people. So I really appreciate you being so candid and open about like all the things that you are juggling in this process, in this experience, in this journey. So to remind folks of like, you know, everybody will, like, when you want to do something, you will go through whatever it needs to happen to get it done. And we're just so grateful that you're doing that for the South Sacramento community. So kudos to you. Snaps to Duke.
Thank you. It's been fantastic. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I will definitely follow up as our campaign heats up. From now until January, our goal is to raise as much money as possible, to go out and just be in the community wholeheartedly, as many events we can attend, as many things as we can donate to and be a part of. That's the goal. And come January, Storm and Fury, hit the ground running, hitting neighborhoods, talking to everybody we need to talk to get them engaged. And my goal is engage for life. I want you to always vote, to always care, because that's when they're going to start looking at us and saying, wow, the age group that voted in South Sac was a lot younger. It was a big demographic. We need to start looking at what they're asking for, what kind of changes they're hoping to see in their community. Because that's how you get the attention of those in power. Until, of course, I get there, and then I'm just going to empower folks without needing to go through all that process.
Right. Absolutely. And we need more of y'all to do the work with Duke, to do it, to get in there, because that's what happens, right? Once we get those seats, right? We talk so much about like, get a seat at the table, and then you got to keep the seat and do good things with the seat. So we're excited. We're excited for you. We're very hopeful. Very hopeful.
Thank you. Join the Duke troop.
Yes.
Is that the hashtag? Is that the thing?
It's the hashtag, the Duke troop.
All right. Well, that was an amazing interview.
It was sensational.
Sensational. No, honestly, I feel like the amount of times where I felt like I had to keep my thoughts and emotions focused because I was so inspired and so motivated and really so enlightened. I learned so much. I said this to Duke and I'll say it again. My years of like student activism in some ways like kept me from fully learning about processes that Duke did a great job at explaining to us and sharing with us. And that even kept me from ever even considered doing anything like that. And I think it keeps a lot of people from ever considering that they could do something like it. I actually remember a couple times seeing a couple of people in my network joking, right? But tweeting something like, if you have dirt on me, like, please delete it, because I might want to do this in the future, right? And like, that's exactly, I feel like one of the things that I saw out of the interview and our conversation with Duke is that it's time to redefine politics, and it's time to redefine civic engagement, and it's time to create a change. And he is ready to do it. And all we gotta
already
do
doing
is
it.
Already doing it.
Already. It just I was gonna say too is we talked about how like as millennials we really trust the system, trust the governmental system, because we've seen it fall, crash to smithereens many times throughout our life. And I think with him just being a younger person, and especially in our age range, and invested and really learning how it works and maneuvering through it and building his political career, it really shows like, okay, so there is a way to actually get through this and still help the community really like hone in on what's going on and actually help. It was an interview, but I was so excited to talk about more. I had, just like you mentioned, I was excited. I wanted to see how I can get more involved in his campaign, but also just helping this, at a citywide level overall, even though I'm not in that area. So I'm excited, and I really hope y'all enjoyed this episode. Once again, hashtag Duke stays working, because he does. This man is going, and I love that. And I think that's all my little tidbit I wanted to say.
Yeah. No, I think for me, things came full circle because some of you know I started a new job, and my new job actually is a little bit of a shift, a gear shift, right, within higher education, in doing community engagement work.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this conversation could not have come at a better time because I've been in my new role for a couple of months now, almost 2 months now. And I feel like I'm so used to doing very like task oriented work sometimes, or like I knew what I was doing, right? I had meetings, I was advising, we had events, we wrote resolution, like we did these things. But now when my work really at its core, it's about like changing communities, I started to find myself thinking like, okay, what are we doing besides talking about the vision we have for community and for society, right? Like everybody is talking about like anti-racist approach to community engagement, and in the few spaces, and again noting that those aren't spaces where I've directly been in professionally, and now stepping into them, I'm like, okay, so we talked about it, we all agree, now what, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm seeing the what. Now we need to go to Duke. No, but now we need to go to those spaces, and I appreciate because there is already a vision towards that direction within my department, and our director shared that with me. So the like dots connected for me so quickly because I'm like, this is why she is having this vision in this direction for particularly one of our programs. And I'm like, yeah, I see it now. Like I'm starting to find a little bit of like the answer of like things that I've been asking myself, particularly last week. I was in a couple like network spaces and I was just like, okay, what are we doing? So yeah, I'm super inspired. I'm super grateful for everything that was shared with us, for all the knowledge that was shared with us.
Oh, wait, one more thing I wanted to say. So upon approaching this interview with amazing Duke Cooney, once again, it made me go back and look at some, people that I've kind of known throughout my life that are now like in Congress and things like that. So just to do a little quick shout out to one of my high school teachers, Mr. Mark Takano, who's a congressman, one of the first openly gay congressmen in California, holding it down, and also just initiated a new bill back in July for a 32-hour work week. Okay. I was like, come on, still doing work. Like this man has been not only worked at, as a high school teacher for years and years, but after, retiring from that field of work, went on and continuing in policy changes in Congress, and is still working to this day. This man is still working, so I love that. And
snaps.
Yeah,
no, I love that. I think, that's what I hope like our listeners can get out of this. Like we know you all because y'all are our friends and our story sisters, and you hit us up when you hear our episodes. And I know that there's like amazing individuals in our network and our community out there that could absolutely uplift Duke's campaign and platform. So we call on all of y'all that live in Sacramento, South Sacramento particularly, support, engage, donate, vote. And also some of y'all maybe just need to get up there and run for office too. I don't know. No pressure.
Yeah. You can always just start being on like a community, like
community board.
Community board.
Duke told you how. Duke told us.
Right. So it isn't necessarily like go straight to office. Like it's okay. There's steps you can still take and still have the same effect on the community. It doesn't all have to be right away into actual office position. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I'm hoping that everyone that is listening right now is staying hydrated and drinking water. Because I even had to ask Duke about that. Okay. So it's not a game. So once again,
then me sips my coffee.
Corona logic is sipping coffee. Wow.
I had my disclaimer. I told you this would be my drink for today.
I know.
I will drink water after this.
No pressure.
But
I hope y'all enjoyed our episode, and we have more coming your way. So just stay tuned, engage with us on our social media, on our Instagram, our Twitter, our YouTube, our SoundCloud. We're on Spotify as well. We're on everything just about. So,
everything except Apple Podcasts, just not Apple Podcasts.
Right. We're not there yet. We won't talk about that. We're not there yet. Anyway.
Yes.
So tune in, definitely engage with us. We have more stuff coming your way, and I hope you enjoyed and hope you stay hydrated.
Yes, stay hydrated.
Until next time.